This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be. Today we're going to discuss eavesdropping, or domestic espionage, surveillance. It's the sort of thing you expect to see happen in totalitarian, backward states with hammers and sickles and red flags. Unfortunately, it's something that has been happening in America, right here in this country, under a fellow by the name of Barack Hussein Obama, whom you might remember as having been President of the United States for the worst 8 years in this country's history, and I include the Civil War in that. Now, that may seem like an exaggerated statement, but to understand why that is true, we have to discuss much of what really went on under his regime that has not actually been properly discussed or exposed, and this is going to be one of those discussions. Now, you may or may not have heard about the latest breaking news, which is that after denying, of course, that there was any eavesdropping or unmasking of Trump officials by Susan Rice, who was the former National Security Advisor under Barack Hussein Obama, Susan Rice told members of Congress that she actually unmasked some Trump officials, names still unknown, in order to monitor a visit by the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates. So now we know that Susan Rice was indeed actually spying on Trump personnel. Now, just to flash back a little, unmasking is what happens as a supposed safeguard on NSA surveillance. So the NSA can conduct surveillance of foreigners. It's not supposed to be conducting surveillance of Americans because then we'd be living in a police state, and that is just no fun at all. So when the NSA does engage in unmasking of Americans, that means that the names of Americans which would ordinarily be redacted, they would ordinarily be blacked out, are instead unmasked, which means the names of Americans are visible, which means the NSA is effectively eavesdropping on Americans. And when the White House or White House officials or political appointees of any kind, including Susan Rice, request those names, that amounts to domestic surveillance, and there better really be a very, very good reason for it, because that is actually a violation of the Bill of Rights. And you know, we still occasionally do believe in the Bill of Rights, despite the New York Times pointing out that the First Amendment and the Second Amendment are big, tragic mistakes. I mean, at least we used to believe in the whole actually getting a warrantless for surveillance. And in any case, here we are. So Susan Rice's pretext for this was that some Trump officials, we still haven't gotten the names, but possibly including Bannon, Kushner, and Flynn, were actually being targeted because of a supposed meeting with the UAE Crown Prince. Now, what's behind all this? Why would the United Arab Emirates Crown Prince summon up the interest of the Obama administration? Now, the Obama administration was quite enthusiastic about Iran. It was quite enthusiastic about the Muslim Brotherhood. It was somewhat less enthusiastic about the UAE. Why was it less enthusiastic about the UAE? And again, this is part of international politics that doesn't get reported much by the same media, which is very interested in, for example, in really important things like how many scoops of ice cream Trump has and the details of Ted Cruz's staffer's Twitter account. What the UAE actually had begun doing was reversing the Arab Spring. So the UAE felt threatened by the Arab Spring, by the rising power of the Muslim Brotherhood. The UAE suspected that the Muslim Brotherhood wanted to take over, and was probably quite correct about that. So the UAE began a very sharp pushback against Qatar, which was a close backer of the Muslim Brotherhood, of ISIS, of Al-Qaeda, of the various Islamists, and of course of Hamas, which is another way of saying the Muslim Brotherhood. So the UAE and Qatar began this kind of face-off, and this has significant implications for our foreign policy, because unfortunately much of our foreign policy is actually based, particularly in that region, around who is lobbying more people. Qatar obviously has a great deal of influence. I mean, Qatar threw in a huge sum of money just to run Al Jazeera America for some time before they completely went bankrupt doing that. But they've been buying quite a lot of officials. For that matter, you can even see some of the stuff happening in certain Google search results, where you'll see Qatar and its opponents buying Google search ads for certain terms. So this has been going on for a while. Eventually, the Saudis decided that the UAE was correct, and they began a kind of anti-Islamist coalition opposing the Muslim Brotherhood. They helped roll back the Muslim Brotherhood takeover in Egypt and other places. They been backing, and in some cases even very directly backing, the Egyptian campaign against Islamists in Libya. And this is a major rollback of the Arab Spring. So while the CNN story, which pushes this and actually provided the revelation of just what pretext Susan Rice used for the unmasking, blamed the Russians, the real story was that the UAE is anti-Islamist. Why was Susan Rice monitoring a meeting between an anti-Islamist government and Trump officials? Again, this is pretty self-explanatory. They were trying to protect Islamists. They were trying to protect the Muslim Brotherhood. They were trying to protect political Islam, which is the whole premise of the Arab Spring, which is that we're going to empower the so-called political Islamists. We're going to help them take over, and then they're not going to be terrorists anymore because they're already going to control the country, so why even bother with the terrorism? That was the whole premise of Obama's New Beginning, the Cairo speech, his whole foreign policy. So this was point one. Now, can we find an actual pattern here? In fact, we can find a pattern here because, and this is really one of the most overlooked and most outrageous stories, this was not the first time that the Obama administration had engaged in domestic surveillance of political opponents on behalf of Islam. Yes, that's right, they have done it before. The last time around that they did it was during the campaign for the Iran deal. As some people may remember, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was very aggressively campaigning against the Iran deal, and the NSA was monitoring, eavesdropping on his conversations with members of Congress and with American Jews. Now, this sounds really outrageous, and you're wondering why the media hasn't reported it, but the question really answers itself. Much like the CNN story about Susan Rice and the UAE, when it came time to actually reveal it, the Wall Street Journal very carefully released a very, very packaged story giving the Obama side of the story. But the story pretty straightforwardly admitted that the White House sought information from the NSA about conversations that Netanyahu was having with members of Congress, with just American Jews, for that matter, just Americans in general, Jewish or non-Jewish, in order to counter Netanyahu's campaign, which is to say that the White House was effectively engaging in domestic surveillance to protect the Iran deal. And the purpose of the Iran deal is to protect Iran's nuclear program and its expansion of influence in the region. So first time around, the Obama administration was monitoring and eavesdropping on Americans, including on members of Congress, to protect Iran. Second time around, the Obama administration was monitoring Americans to protect the Islamists of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's bad enough that we have domestic surveillance. It's bad enough that we have this kind of left-wing police state. It's bad enough that we have surveillance directed against Americans. All those are really terrible, and on their own, they would justify impeachment. They would justify criminal proceedings because it's a fundamental violation of everything that America represents, of everything that America stands for. We are not a police state. We are not a place where the government can monitor and eavesdrop on political opponents. I mean, Watergate is considered the prime national scandal. It's considered the worst thing that a president ever did while in office. And yet Obama did the same thing at least twice that we know of. In fact, we don't know of anymore because Flynn, who actually headed the National Security Council, was quickly forced out and replaced with McMaster. McMaster has protected Susan Rice's access to classified information and forced out Flynn supporters, and it was some of those Flynn's people who actually exposed the Susan Rice eavesdropping to begin with. So the swamp has made it very clear and very certain that no more of these eavesdropping incidents will actually be reported, at least until we actually have a major change and McMaster is out. And at this point, I don't know how likely that is or who will replace him. At that point, we might actually, the American people might actually find out just as what has been going on and what has been done by the Obama administration. At this point, we don't know, but we do know the motives. In both cases, the Obama administration was monitoring members of Congress, was monitoring members of an incoming administration to protect its Islamist agenda. So as I've said, it is really bad enough that a government is monitoring domestic political opponents. That is completely unacceptable. But it's even worse when it's monitoring domestic political opponents in support of enemies, in support of enemy nations, in support of Islamic terrorists, in support of those people who have made it very clear that their mission is death to America. So the United States government under Barack Obama was actually engaging in monitoring domestic political opponents in support of a death to America position, in support of the Muslim Brotherhood, in support of Iran, in support of our Islamist enemies. That is several stages beyond outrageous. There are, frankly, no words to actually express just how outrageous, how evil, and how unacceptable all of that is. The question obviously going forward is, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to let the story die, or are we going to continue exposing it? Watergate began as a story that some people certainly expected would eventually just peter out and die. But journalists did not allow the story to die. And of course, they had the support of the media because it was a Republican president, and so he was a valid target. The question is whether we are actually going to take our eyes off the ball and let the story die, or whether we're going to keep this pressure on. And keeping this pressure on means demanding a full accounting from within the security agencies. It means demanding that Congress continue monitoring it. And beyond that, it means that we must continue exposing the motive, because conservatives are often very good at zeroing in on the particular crimes, but then the media comes out and says, okay, as they've said with Rice, nothing improper was done. And you know, when they say nothing improper was done, that means something very, very improper was done, because you don't have to say nothing improper was done when there's no abuse. It's when there's an appearance of abuse that they have to come out and say, oh, sorry, folks, nothing improper was done. It's just business as usual. It's not business as usual, and we should not allow it to be business as usual. This is a scandal that is far, far worse than Watergate, in part because we don't even know the full scope of it. What we do know about it is outrageous. It is a crime. It is probably one of the greater crimes that a president had committed in office, but the Obama administration had kept moving the bar higher and higher in this regard until there seems to be no shortage of crimes. But suppressing Americans, whether it was the arrest of a filmmaker for making a YouTube video that criticized Muhammad, or whether it was spying on Americans to protect Islamist agendas, is completely unacceptable. Barack Hussein Obama got up at the United Nations after Benghazi and declared that the future should not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. The future should not belong to those who spy on Americans in defense of Islamism. Thank you and good night. And if you enjoyed this Daniel Greenfield moment on the Glazov Gang, please continue to support the Glazov Gang, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and keep listening, keep watching, and keep speaking out, and keep fighting the good fight.